Hello, everyone. I'm Lori DeToro, Communications Manager for Turntide Technologies. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about the disruption that technology is bringing to the mobility industry and why you should start adopting now. We are thrilled to have Josh Felt and Adam Livesay presenting for us this morning. Thanks so much for joining us today, Josh and Adam.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, thanks. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
We're thrilled to have you. So before we get started with the presentation, I want to let you know that we have some housekeeping tips to share. If you've joined us before, you know this, but a little bit different this time. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on demand on the Current Wave website. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation and answering them throughout the presentation. So ask them as you have them in the Q&A section, not the chat section, the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar app. We also have the link for our May webinar around the next generation of axial flux motors posted in the chat. You can go ahead and register for that before you log out of this session. And as I always tell you, remember this is a live event. So when we mess up, and we probably will, laugh along with us and be supportive. So I think that's it for housekeeping, except to just remind you that Adam and Josh want to answer questions throughout the presentation. So please get those questions in as soon as you have them. And I think we're ready to get started. Josh and Adam, take it away.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, so everyone, welcome. Today's discussion is going to be more of a discussion than kind of some of our traditional webinars. Adam and I have worked together in different capacities over a little over a decade probably, bringing new technologies to manufacturers and helping them adopt and kind of lay out their roadmap. Going back, starting with electrohydraulic controls and the adoption there that brought disruption probably 10 to 12 years ago to that market, and then on to IoT, electrification, so on and so forth. So just wanted to kind of a little background first. I am the business development director or one of the business development directors for Turntide in North America. My focus is with our channel partners and distribution teams. And the world I came from is in that system integration and design piece. And then Adam, if you want to give kind of a quick background of where you're at with Elevate.
Sure. So thanks again for joining us. My name is Adam Livesay. I'm one of the founders for a company called Elevate. We build an IoT solutions for the off-highway market. As Josh mentioned, we've worked together for the last 10, 12 years, helping OEMs deploy this technology in their organizations. I like to say that we have the bumps, bruises, and scars through that time. And I think some of the stuff we see is very consistent, that as technology evolves and changes, the same patterns and headwinds that organizations face are very similar. So I think walking through this will be a real interesting conversation, and looking forward to the questions and the feedback from the attendees.
So I think to start with, we want to look at, kind of what are the traditional drivers of technology for equipment manufacturers to consider. And these are fairly consistent across any of the technologies that we tend to deal with, both electrification space for myself, IoT space for Adam. Obviously, environmental, very, very specific to electrification. Um, we're seeing that varies from continent to continent, country to country, but it has kind of been the key driver over the years. We're starting to see that settle a little bit, and some of these other things are starting to play in, whether it's safety, addressing labor concerns, noise. Adam, what are some of the key regulations that you deal with in the IoT space?
Yeah, for sure. So, like in the environmental aspect, we have a lot of environmental initiatives around EOG. We have a lot of stuff around water waves, a lot of stuff around ports, oil and gas, construction, you name it. And a lot of that's been done, manual processes or very inefficient ways of data gathering. So that's becoming a lot more automated. Um, the other pieces around safety and labor, same thing, right? So being able to be able to track safety incidents or be able to report on encourage better safety behavior, the whole deal. So this is a massive trend for us. In the environmental aspect, there's just so much more data tracking and reports that need to be done, that the more that you can get that accurate data without using a bunch of administrative overhead is a real big push for a lot of our OEMs.
And then the new piece for us that is starting to really play out is that noise aspect, and that tends to be more at a municipal level. But we're seeing a lot of equipment manufacturers adopting electrification or some sort of electric approach to a traditional mechanical equipment because of local municipalities, be it that certain residential areas can't have specific noise issues, or around golf courses, around inner cities that are trying to bring decibel levels down. That's something that we're seeing more and more push for, that I think additional manufacturers need to consider.
Yeah. So on that point, Josh. So most of the IoT applications that we see in municipal OEMs, maybe not most, but getting close to the majority, are around electrification vehicles, right? So like street sweeping applications where they're trying to reduce the noise of the street sweepers as they're going through the cities of like Seattle or Chicago or whatever, right? The other piece you nailed on the head is golf courses. These green rollers that could be rolling the greens at 4 a.m. in the morning near all the houses. Those residents would much rather like a quiet green roller than a gas powered green roller. And so it's really interesting that from the end customer, right, that actual person that's living inside that neighborhood is driving that demand for those quieter type vehicles for a better quality of environment.
Absolutely. And we're starting to see more and more. So if we look at technology disruption, obviously the biggest play tends to be the market. What's the market telling us that it needs? And we're finally starting to see that. I know in the electrification space, passenger vehicles obviously were the first to adopt. Some of your large tier one manufacturers have started to dabble in that. We're starting to see that come down market with smaller and smaller equipment manufacturers. And then customer demand is finally opening up to push more in that direction. And then the big piece is VCs and PEs. So Adam, I know you spent a lot of time in the venture capital, private equity world. What are you seeing in terms of their impact on some of this technology?
Yeah. So the VCs, the venture capital, the private equity, they have targeted this off-highway space, right? They look at our industry as being very, very much poised for disruption. And so you're seeing a lot more investment into actually new OEMs, vehicles, a lot of autonomy vehicles out there, a lot of electrification vehicles. And the interesting thing about venture capital is they can make 20 bets and only have to hit 1 out of 20. So it's going to change this business model where internally, like in our internal, industry, we've had to self-fund this, right? Companies would make these investments, longer term R&D, longer term scale. Well, VCs are targeting it now and they're saying, hey, this is an older technology industry that's ripe for disruption for all of these issues that we're going to be talking about, and it's time to pump a lot of money in there. So we work with a number of these OEMs now where the rapid pace of, they don't have to make any money, right? They don't have to make money for 4 or 5 years. They can just really turn that innovation, start to grab market share until they become profitable. So I think we got to really think about this as we approach this next generation of machines, because we do have outside pressure coming in now from people that weren't necessarily in our industry before.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the technologies that we're seeing these disruptions in is where we kind of want to spend some of our time. Obviously, electrification. That's kind of why Turntides got our webinar series is to address this. A lot of our customers have seen kind of the need for electrification, be it the motors, batteries, controls. we're seeing some pretty significant investments along that line as well, and some new technologies coming out every day. Um, the axial flux motor is something that's been around forever, but because of manufacturing improvements, is starting to have an impact. Battery technology is changing almost weekly. The impact that's having. The IoT space, Adam, you can talk to how that's kind of developed over the last decade and the impact that's having on some of these other industries as well, and these other technologies.
Yeah. So it's exciting for us is a couple things. One, 4 or 5 years ago, I don't think we would have gone into a presentation with a customer with the term API, um, on a PowerPoint. All of our OEMs now understand how to take data and move it from cloud systems to other pieces inside their business. That's a big deal. They're really starting to build strategies for machine learning out there, right? So we'll talk about how this drives other areas of the machine. A lot of decision making out there. Something's happening in my machine. What would be the recommended fix? We're seeing the stuff of utilization in the machines in the market. How does it impact supply chain, manufacturing? And just this idea of like secure data. Um, Again, 4 or 5 years ago, companies didn't really have a good data privacy strategy. Now they've kind of created their data privacy, their GDPR strategies as organizations, and they just want to make sure their IoT partners um, meet those requirements. All this was kind of the wild, wild west 5 years ago. A lot of stuff is formulated into more like I'd say industry standards or industry acceptable frameworks and practices. So we're going from like science projects to actual production type scenarios, and that's accelerated, Josh, everything across the board. The other two pieces I would say from the off-highway aspect is the cost of the hardware. The cost of the actual cell phone modems and gateways have drastically reduced. So they're following those same cost curves that we've seen in other areas of the sector. So it makes it more efficient. Same thing with the cost of connectivity. So cell phone cost, satellite cost, and just how much better the cloud infrastructure is. Amazon, Azure, they've got so much better over the last 4 or 5 years and continue to get better, that there's just a lot more, services available and product offerings than there were before.
And we're absolutely seeing the same thing on the EV side. Whether it's battery costs coming down, chemistry costs coming down, manufacturing is starting to catch up in the way that the motors and controllers are manufactured, to be able to bring those costs to make it more obtainable. Lori, we had a question, I think you said?
Yes, we do have one question. So, what are some technologies that are helpful that many OEMs don't think about or aren't implementing?
Well, and I think the technologies we're talking here um, are ones that we can talk about this as we go on in the discussion a little bit, but if I think the technologies are somewhat known, but I think it's the adoption process that's the struggle. I think it's a great question to lead into kind of where we were going. The one of the struggles that we're seeing manufacturers have is they implement new technologies, whether it's IoT, whether it's electrification, if they're trying to adopt an autonomous approach, they tend to tiptoe into this. And I don't know how much you've seen this, Adam, recently. I know we saw it a lot, in previous years, but without a specific roadmap and business plan in place, they tend to tiptoe in. And for example, in electrification, what we see is this idea that, hey, can we take our existing machine, let's swap out a couple of parts and call it an electrification or an EV, be it for marketing purposes, be it for research purposes. Unfortunately, with that approach, you're only going to get the return that you put into it. You're not necessarily going to see all of the benefits that a full EV approach brings to the market and to your equipment, which your ROI then is massively underestimated because you're not taking advantage of all of those. So I think it's less what the technologies are. I think those are fairly well known. I think it's the impact that a poor or an impartial implementation starts to have on it.
So I'll build on that too, Josh. So I think from the technology aspect, I think you're spot on. I think that the one piece that could probably be seen more across the board in OEMs is vision. I think the vision is really prominent, like in the autonomous vehicle aspect. But we're seeing more OEMs now just starting to put vision into their machines for safety or identification. Um, it could be in agriculture, identifying certain types of trees. Safety could be inside ports. It could be inside street sweepers to identify stuff like coyotes running across the street that the driver might not actually see, right? And so
Yeah.
these things are have really gained a lot of traction in the auto space, and now they can be deployed in the off highway space. But your point of how an organization decides to roll out the next generation of machine is really big. This goes back to that VC statement. On the VC statement, they're going to fund these companies tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to say, think about how you would do this different and think from the ground up. And now, what those companies don't have is they don't have the sales channels, the dealer network, the service network that our industry has today. It's going to take them a long time to build that. So that's our advantage here, right? And they don't have all this information that we have from building machines for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But if you're going to do a new technology, the most successful companies we've worked with have treated it like a real time, like an actual division. Okay. This is going to be our digital services division. This is going to be our electrification division. We're going to put budget around this and not make it another task on other people's jobs, but we're actually going to make a team that's going to look out 5 years and say, what are we going to do over the next 5 years to continue um, to build a better product, to steal market share, and eventually get to revenue. So I think there are some companies that are disrupting some industries that have been out there for 5, 6 years now, and they're taking more and more of the market from legacy OEMs. It's very interesting to watch, and I don't know if those legacy OEMs will catch back up. And we started work with them. They started building 10, 20, 30 machines in year one, and now they're doing 1,200 machines a year in year five. And their biggest competitor, does 10,000 machines a year, but they're slowly chipping away. And now that competitor is trying to figure out how to catch back up, but they're 5 years behind the schedule, right? And so, but they built a team to go after it with a lot of focus with a 5 year plan rather than a hobby or a part time job inside the larger organization.
Thanks, Adam. Laura, any follow-up questions to that?
Just one. So you talked about the tiptoeing in issue. What are some specific issues that you might have or an OEM might have in trying to retrofit for electrification versus designing for electrification?
So perfect example, and you'll see this a lot with some of your legacy, smaller and legacy, or sorry, larger legacy component manufacturers. You've got an existing technology on the machine that's in production. It's creating a certain revenue, certain profit margins that you don't necessarily want to redesign that whole piece of the machine. And so you may take and say, hey, we're gonna redesign part of the machine, but not everything. Take, for example, this crossover between electrification and hydraulics that we're seeing in fluid power space. There are definitely cases where it makes sense to remove an engine, drop a battery in there, put an electric motor driving a hydraulic pump, and leave all the rest of the system the same. Whether that's your traction drive, your work functions, your auxiliary systems, whatever it might be. There are cases for that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of scenarios where there's just not an ROI case to be made doing that, because you still have some of the inefficiencies with the hydraulics. You still have some of the safety concerns along the hydraulics. And you're not optimizing the machine to be the best use case. So instead of saying, hey, how can we design this machine around an electric EV drivetrain or traction drive, we're trying to kind of cut corners and keep as much of the legacy machine in place. And I've seen it fail many, many times where there's a lot of money put in, there's a machine built, and the ROI isn't realized, or the customers aren't fully adopting it because it doesn't really address the issues. It's basically a marketing tool more so than an actual revenue generation. And I don't know if you've seen similar things in that from an IoT standpoint, Adam, uh, where there's just partial adoption without a real plan around it.
Yeah, for sure. But so I wanted to make a comment, Josh. I was just at National Fluid Power Association last week, and they had an OEM from the industry talk about their electrification and hybrid journey. And one of the things that's interesting that you just mentioned is now they're at the stage where they're completely redesigning their hydraulic systems on those machines. Because to your point, they've been able to look at it going, okay, we have these electrification machines or these hybrid machines, and so we can look at how to get a more optimized hydraulic system, and it's not going to look the same, right?
Mhm.
It's going to look differently. And so to your point, you can get the ROI from electrification, but then you're going to lose a lot of performance and efficiency and cost on the hydraulic side unless you do that redesign as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, for IoT for us, if we don't have a business case attached to it, if our customers do not have a business case, if that's better service, better maintenance, trying to drive more aftermarket parts and long-term service contracts, engineering design loop feedbacks, getting information into the supply chain. If they're just out there to have a nice feature and put tech on, it's going to fail. They have to have a business case identified and drive towards the business case. 'Cause at the end of the day, IoT is just a tech feature, kind of blends in the background, right? It's really
Mhm.
what are you doing as an organization, and what's your vision for the next 5 years. So for us, you really got to know like what's IoT doing for your company, not as a feature that you can put on a data sheet or a marketing material.
And I think I mean, that's true for any of these new technologies coming out. Autonomy as well. If there's a lack of how it fits into the overall business strategy, it's again going to be a little bit of a science project. Um, and the ROI is not really going to be realized. So how does
Yeah.
that fit in with your digital strategy? How does that fit in with your next generation of products? And how does that all fall under your marketing and sales strategy?
Yeah, we work with an OEM, so we all know OEM design cycles are very long, right? We started working with OEM beginning January of 2023, and they go into production in 2026 on their next generation of machines. Currently, their aftermarket parts and long-term service contracts are just north of 10% of total revenue. Their goal by 2030 that they've made to the market is over 25% of total revenue. Okay. So that is being built by service software, IoT connectivity, new control systems, you name it, right? But that is they're now not just designing their business on the technical capabilities of the machine, but they're designing their machines now on how are they going to drive our business to create more revenue for the company. That's a different thought, right? You're bringing in multiple parts of the organization. You have the IT team, you have the service team, you have the sales team. They're all coming together to say we're going to hit this goal by 2030, and we're going to bring all of our vendors in to help us get there, and it's going to positively impact our business more than just how do we sell more machines. Okay, that's a really big differentiator than how it's done in the past. When Josh, you and I have put in a lot of CAN control systems in the field over the years on our electric hydraulic era of our careers, and that was about building a better machine, a more efficient machine, right? Better operator interface, safety. With digital and IoT, you're actually building you're enhancing business models out there, right? Completely different on the approach that you take to get there.
Absolutely. Um, I think we see that as well in this idea of a net zero gain. I've had some conversations with some manufacturers over the recent weeks where when they're building out their go-to-market strategy, they're struggling with this idea from an EV adoption of where it's going. The EV is looked at as a displacement of their mechanical or hydraulic systems. And while there's a bit of that, I think that too often we're not looking at the larger picture and thinking, this idea of think outside the frame of the machine. And
Oh, I love
sure,
that.
there might be some cannibalization of your existing equipment, but what the technology allows you to do is see some additional revenue streams and build some equipment to tackle some other problems in the market. And it doesn't have to be a net zero replacement in terms of total units sold. It can address a different part of the market.
100%. And one of the things we love about like electrification projects from an IoT perspective is they're inherently they have a lot more technology and a lot more connectivity, a better way to run service tools, a better way
Hmm.
to update software than the legacy machines out there. So the companies that are really getting it are going, oh, from our battery management system to our controller softwares to everything is connected so much more elegantly than these integrated hydraulic type machines
Hmm.
out there. And so the electrification is very interesting as we move to this next digital age where they can start to build these business systems, they can build these business models, they can enhance their service departments, they can provide value add to their dealers and their service networks because they have the infrastructure now to do that, right? So it's
Absolutely.
we get super excited when we work with them because it's like, wow, you're in this whole green field of being able to connect up all these components to provide a better and let's face it, our industry has this issue where we got too many people retiring, not enough young people coming in. So the better service tools you can build around that, is going to be really powerful. And electrification really is poised well to help us get there.
For sure. Laura, any other questions from that before
No,
we move
that's
on?
all we have right now.
Okay. Um, the last piece of this that we would kind of address is the strategic partnerships, collaborations, co-opetition. The one of the things that I think we've got to remember in this industry and be ready for um, any sort of manufacturing process is you've got to be ready to collaborate, whether it's with other technologies or with some of your competition, even. I know we saw that a lot, Adam, years ago, rolling out the IoT piece. We're seeing that in electrification for sure. When it comes to component manufacturers, most do not have a full quote unquote portfolio of EV products that covers every possible combination. And so there's got to be a lot of collaboration at the component level. There's also going to be a lot of collaboration from a manufacturer standpoint to be able to say, okay, which of my manufacturers or which of my component suppliers and vendors work well together, both from a technology standpoint and from a relationship standpoint. I know we've been making a lot of effort at Turntide to partner with some of the traditional technologies out there, whether it's gearbox manufacturers, hydraulic manufacturers, um, and some of what would be considered maybe a competitor because they might have a product that plays really nicely with what we manufacture and provides a great solution for our customer base, um, as opposed to trying to fight individually and the customer getting frustrated, not being able to show the ROI, not being able to have a truly integrated system. Um, I don't know if you want to talk to some of the collaboration that you've seen. This was kind of adopted early on in the controls business, and has grown from there into some of the other hardware and products.
Yeah, for sure. So this might go a little bit long-winded, but I'll tell you my theory on this. So we've always been a big believer in ecosystem partnerships, right? That can be a frenemy state, that can be a true commercial partnership or technology partnership. We've seen this trend play out in other industries. If you go back to like when the data center, really started to take off, you had companies like Mitsubishi be the lead and Dell come in with them and stack like Dell servers inside Mitsubishi boxes and vice versa. They started to be frenemies that had to provide a better solution to companies out there that needed big data servers. We see this now on our phones. I have an iPhone, I can run my Windows apps on there. We never thought that you could have an Apple hardware 10, 15 years ago that would run Windows on it, right? So this stuff starts to come into play. When we started in hydraulics, the major suppliers, not all the suppliers, but major suppliers set the tone. The major suppliers, very siloed, right? Our controllers work with our controllers. And yes, you can make them work with our hydraulics, but not as good because you have to use our brand to make our hydraulics better. That started to chip away a little bit by little bit. But one thing they always did was say, you can only use our service tool. So if you have to remotely diagnose your controllers, you have to use our service tool. And if you have multiple controllers on a machine, now you have to use multiple service tools to do that. That started to go away 3 or 4 years ago. Companies started to collaborate. Now all the major suppliers are working with companies like ourselves and others to say, hey, we'll give you access to our service tools, and it can be on our competitors' boxes, it can be on our boxes, because at the end of the day, the OEM is putting so much more technology on these machines. They have so much more sophistication, new displays, controllers, sensors, electrification, you name it, right? That they got to be able to maintain service and deploy those machines in a very complicated environment, very sophisticated environment. And what we talked about earlier, the same thing's happening. A lot of that workforce is starting to retire. So for every 5 baby boomers leaving our industry, only 2 are entering our industry. So we're getting this gap. Oh, and then by the way, those Gen Zers are only staying at companies on average 2.9 years before they move. So our industry is changing. The labor force is drastically looking different. At the same time, we have all this new technology coming in. The only way that we're going to be successful is with collaboration, right? We're going to have to empower the OEM and the OEM's dealers and service centers to be able to support this new technology rolls out there. So that's driving a lot of change to the supply chain. Now we're doing stuff of sharing data back with major suppliers for them to put it into large data set models to run, analytics to say, hey, this event occurred. This is our recommendation for service on that machine based on our 20 years of service records. And we're seeing that theme become more and more prevalent and sharing that information. So, I think that 5 years ago we were kind of beating this drum, and I think only a few people kind of saw it coming out there. But I think the mass majority now all have collaboration frameworks of how to work with them, and that's a big deal. This is going to make, and if you go back, you take this one aspect, Josh, and you go back to the very beginning slides on what are some of the headwinds. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, you and I did an electrification project on a snow and ice machine. And on that electrification project, none of the suppliers really worked together. And it's a very cobbled together system that, while in proof of concept was awesome, there was a lot of concerns about stability and reliability and production.
Yep.
If you fast forward 10 years from now, that machine is so much more stable now, right? It's
Mhm.
unbelievable because all these suppliers know how to work together. So it was very hard to get that project going 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And now all those barriers have been reduced and you're able to hit the actual application use case and business case so much easier. So
Absolutely.
that's a big deal. I think we need to see more of this. I think we've made the big turn, but not do I think we're going I think we're going to see more of this. I think you're going to see a lot tighter collaborations and ecosystems form. And then the other piece is, again, long-winded, but the other piece is when you go into an OEM and folks on the technology side have worked together multiple times. They've been through the mud, the blood, and the beer together. That gives the OEM a lot of confidence that they're just not technologies that can talk together. They're actually technologies that have done this before and deployed it. And when the
Mhm.
OEM is picking the technologies, they're picking the technology partners as much as they're picking the technology,
Mhm.
right? And that's a really big thing here is that you have to have all of this resilience built together to go in there and say confidently, we've done this before. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be awesome. And we know how to work together and we're going to get to you to where you ultimately want to be.
Absolutely. Well, and we're in addition to that collaboration that we're seeing on the component side, the component manufacturer side. that we're pushing hard for, a lot of our partners are pushing hard for. This is where we also start to see some of the benefits of these system integrators and distribution channels that are adopting this. That for a lot of manufacturers out there, it's unrealistic for them to have an engineering team dedicated just to new technology or just to electrification adoption, data planning, whatever that might be. And this is where those system integrator partners come in, whether it's a traditional systems integrator that also distributes product, whether it's some of these business models that act almost like an engineering firm and support. I think we've got to be more willing to work with those organizations because they bring a lot of value in having done a lot of that additional work as well, identifying that this EV technology works with this system controls, works with this IoT platform, can integrate real well with legacy components, whether it be hydraulic or mechanical as well.
Yeah, I mean, I came from the system integration world, right? The distribution world. There's massive value there because you see so many different applications and so many different suppliers to make this work. So your learning curve is so fast compared to that siloed approach that if it's just with one supplier, then you just kind of know that one supplier's footprint. If it's internally to your internal engineering team, they're kind of just focused on their machines.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
system integration, the distribution value is they're looking at dozens, if not hundreds, of applications across their territory or across the continent or worldwide, and they're learning so much, right? There's a massive value add, especially for those OEMs that don't have the massive engineering departments, right? So, some of the most incredible application engineers that I've worked with my almost 20 years in the industry now come from the system integration and distribution side because they are taking so many different types of suppliers and so many different types of technology and helping it deploy into these OEM applications. So there's a massive, massive value there that is going to be critical as we move this forward. And the other piece, Josh, I think with all these technologies that's really like key is in the past. So these technologies, they change pretty rapidly, right? Autonomy, electrification, IoT, and they're built in a way that you can update it every year, right? So your machine can actually become smarter year after year after year because of all the reasons we've talked about, the way that the infrastructure is built, the connectivity, the whole deal. So what's really interesting about this is when you're picking a partner, that's a long-term partner, right? It's not like I bought a pump and that pump's going to go there and that pump's going to be the same pump for 20 years. We're actually going to be learning from these machines and these systems and be able to update them and make changes. And so that partnership's so key. And that goes from the supplier partnership or that system integration partnership, because every year you'll be able to make changes out there. Majority of our customers run annual software updates. It used to be a problem occurred in the field, fire a drill, push
Mm-hmm.
software update, get it fixed. Now it's, oh, let's look at our data, let's prepare for the next model year, and let's push software updates like a Tesla update to be able to update display screens, update collaboration parameters, maybe some safety parameters. And that machine now is better today than it was 12 months ago. That's pretty incredible. And I think all these new technologies lend themselves to be able to provide that value to the OEM market.
And I think that's one of the things that's unique from a EV standpoint, that you can see performance enhancements
Yeah.
from software updates, just because of the flexibility of the way the EVs are designed versus traditional mechanical piece of equipment. Lori,
It's incredible.
any other questions that have popped up?
Yes, I was going to jump in if you hadn't asked me. As an IoT business that benefits from a digital OEM landscape versus hydraulic, do you work to provide vision and enable the business cases with clients proactively?
Good
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. We absolutely do. Because often it's a new it is a new strategy, it is a new plan. So it's the vision out there as well as maybe the plan and the execution. Um, so it's really tied together. We spend a lot of time in that aspect of it with our customers and our partners.
That was all I have for now.
Thanks. So that was the meat of it. I think at this point, open up for questions. For Adam and I think coming from the space that we came from, where we saw a lot of um, kind of chaotic approach to new technology implementation, um, and limitations that manufacturers, I think, put on themselves because of trying to look at things from um, kind of a piecemealed strategy as opposed to a full comprehensive go-to-market approach. I think that's the biggest action item that manufacturers can take with their equipment is say, hey, look, if if I'm thinking from the ground up, what am I going to do different? What can my equipment what problems can my equipment solve if I were to able to step back and start from square one? Because with these new technologies, you can think different from inception all the way through as opposed to being locked into what you had before.
Yeah. So, a common kind of phased approach that we take, Joshua, is like connect the machine, then connect the business, then connect the ecosystem. And if you're thinking about that way, right, you're looking at, okay, what are the really interesting things on that machine that I want to know about, right? And from performance, safety, maintenance, service, whatever. And then you really start to get that project started and making sure you have the right technology partners, you make sure you have the right system design, all that stuff. But then the very next question you ask is like, okay, that machine data, what's important for my business?
Mhm.
How do I get that to other business systems, right? And IT departments have been so valuable in this because, you know, typically IT departments have been very internal focused, right? Your laptops, your email servers and stuff. Now they're helping you take stuff from your machine data and put it back into business systems, service systems, ERP systems, manufacturing systems, dealer networks, you name it. And then it's, okay, then how do we connect the rest of my ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
How do I enhance my service centers, my dealer centers, and my end users and stuff? So it's really interesting as you step through this. And I think sometimes you want to boil that ocean, but if you can kind of just create these three big phases from the IoT aspect, again, it's connect the machine, then connect the business, and then connect the ecosystem. And I think you'll really start to see that value curve go up. But if you don't connect the machine right, you don't get the
Mhm.
right information off the machine you want, connecting the
Yep.
business is not going to be nearly as valuable. And if you're
Yep.
not getting ROI in the business, you're not going to get ROI in the ecosystem.
Well, and I think that's where it's interesting to see where all these new technologies intersect. Um, if you're designing an EV machine and you want it to be a replacement or an upgrade from some of your mechanical machines, one of the biggest struggles that we have is identifying um, duty cycle
For
and
sure.
in what how does this machine really operate. I don't know, the operator goes over, throws a couple gallons of fuel in it, and they turn around and they keep running. So identifying how the machine is really used, what that duty cycle looks like, allows us to kind of take a couple steps back in designing that EV system. Where we need to be from a performance standpoint, and being able to connect that from an IoT standpoint, being able to build in other data sources and really draw from that, um, allows you to bypass a lot of that early R&D stage that tends to bog everybody down, both from a time and capital standpoint.
So okay, so you're preaching to the choir here. So one of my favorite, I would say, like engagements, not the most business friendly engagement. One of my favorite though tech geeky engagements is when OEMs are going from traditional like ICE or hydraulic machines to electrification, and they'll go out there and they're going to deploy 20, 25 machines with IoT on their traditional machines first in different environments, right? So Arizona versus Seattle, different hills and temperature and all these different things, right? And they'll put them in strategic areas around the country. They're going to gather a lot of data to allow that machine design for that first electrification machine. So they might go gather data for 90 days to understand, how are these machines truly performing? What are their peaks? What are their loads? All these different stuff. And I say from a business standpoint, because it might be 5 years until we actually see
Mhm.
anything that goes into real production. But from my tech geeky side, it's
Yeah.
fascinating when the OEMs actually find out how those machines are truly being operated. And then they got to start thinking about, oh, we can design this in a more efficient, more effective way on this design of the machine. So sometimes taking that initial step just to collect the data first, right? And then using that information to be able to do this electrification piece. And then every iteration of the electrification piece, you're still collecting that data. And now you're comparing that data. You benchmarked it, and now you're comparing it. And you're able to offer, I would say deeper questions or more nuanced questions about it as you start to dial this in. So yeah, one of the favorite things I get involved in, because I think it's so interesting when OEMs see, whoa, it doesn't operate the way we thought it operated, and it gets them to think about how to design the next generation of the machine even better.
For sure. Lori, any other questions? Or
We
if anyone
do
has any
have
questions, feel free
we
to.
do have one more.
Okay.
And you can continue to ask questions, but this is the next one. Are you finding that OEMs understand what they are buying when they decide to invest in electrification or IoT? Do they understand the work required, or that they are only partially adopting technology?
It's a good question. I think it's case by case. I think some manufacturers do actually understand that um, they're kind of piecemealing it together, and they're trying to. It really goes back to those driving factors. What is pushing that manufacturer into adopting, say, an electrification platform? Is it a regulation piece? Is it the market, or is it um, kind of a band-aid, so to speak? So I've seen a lot of manufacturers that are coming out with electrification based equipment strictly to say they have it in the market. They don't necessarily have an in-depth plan on how they're going to monetize it or how it's going to fit into their overall portfolio long term. It's strictly to say that yes, we have a solution. If they're adopting it based on regulation, then that tends to force certain decisions to be made to meet those regulations. Um, Again, that's not necessarily going to take you all the way, because if the goal is strictly to meet the baseline regulations, did that manufacturer take into consideration all of the other improvements to the piece of equipment they could do now that they've been forced to head down this path? So it really is case by case. I think there are some manufacturers that, they really they want to adopt electrification. They want to jump all in, but they're struggling with where to take it and how that fits into their portfolio, or how they're going to take that to market. And that's a different discussion. I think that if there's recognition that that's where they're at and they don't have that plan put together, that's something that absolutely we can help them with. That's something that some of these system integrators can help them with. But I think that's a great place to be from a manufacturer standpoint, because you've recognized that, okay, we want to head down this path, but we also want to do it the right way. We don't want to just throw some dollars at it and kind of baby into it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question, and I'll probably echo some of the stuff that Josh just said. But I'll give you two scenarios. We have a big trend we've seen recently are OEMs that have invested a lot of time and money into their own internal IoT solution over the last 5 or 10 years, and they've seen real good business value out of it. And what they've realized though is they are OEMs that build machines. They're not necessarily IoT software companies. And so what they've realized is the amount of investment it takes on the software IoT companies to build just software in the cloud and software on the edge and stuff. And so we've had a number of these companies actually move from their internal solution over to the Elevate solution. And so they know it, they're bought in, the whole deal. We have other companies, like in the previous question about, do you help them with their vision and the strategy? Because often it's they know that they don't know everything, and they're trying to really understand what is that vision, what's that strategy, and what's that investment that needs to be made to get there. And so, and that investment that needs to be get there really depends on timeline as well, right? And so I would say that um, a lot more companies today know more about what that investment is to get there, both in the organization and time. But we still do run into companies that think, hey, I'm going to take this thing, I'm going to plug it in, it's going to connect all this stuff, and we have all these really cool AI models popping out, right? And that's just not the case yet. But I think that the trend is moving in the right direction where there's been enough value across the industries and enough of these partnerships being formed that they understand that the ROI is the return is a lot greater than the investment that needs to be made.
That's awesome. So Josh, I'm going to ask you to move the slide deck to the end so that your contact information back one more. Thanks. In case anyone wants to get in touch with you guys, that is all the questions we have, and we are going to close out the webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
I want to thank you again, Josh and Adam, for the wonderful presentation. Attendees, thank you for joining us as well. This webinar will be available on demand in about 48 hours. We hope you'll join us and register for our next webinar. And we hope you all have a really great week. And guys, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks so much.